Greetings and salutations, fellow book readers. This is Mark, and the book I'll review today is Under Western Eyes. Before we continue, this is personalized limited edition of Under Western Eyes with leather cover designed and made by me. At the end of the video, I will tell you a couple of ways of how you can get one for yourself, if you are interested. Now let's get back to the review. Under Western Eyes is a novel by the Anglo-Polish writer Joseph Conrad, published in 1911. As I mentioned in the other reviews of Conrad's books, he's one of my favorite writers, and maybe the one with whose prose I connect the most. Perhaps it has something to do with myself being a native Polish speaker and, like Conrad, learning English, me in my late teens and he in his 20s. Conrad was born in the Polish part of the Russian Empire. His parents were somewhat of revolutionary anarchists, and both died as the result of their activities against Russian occupation of their homeland, when Conrad was still a young child. I think this traumatic experience left him with hate of Russia and also with a very strong dislike and negative opinion of any type of revolutionary activities. And further, I think his childhood experiences and some other events he witnessed during his travels made him lose faith in the general goodness of humanity. The belief in a supernatural source of evil is not necessary. Men alone are quite capable of every wickedness. Conrad came from an intellectual and very patriotic family. His father was a translator of English and French literature and political activist, and his mother's brother was a writer and one of the leaders of the 1863 Polish uprising against Russia. Conrad himself was a very intelligent and perceptive child, probably forced by circumstances to mature pretty fast. When he was 6 years old, he wrote on the back of his photograph, "For my dear grandmother, who helped me supply cake for my poor father in prison, from your grandson, a Pole, a Catholic, and a gentleman. Signed, Conrad." For me, Conrad was not only a great writer, but a fascinating human being with a complex personal history that is made visible in his writings. What is Under Western Eyes about? Conrad makes an effort to explain to the Western Europeans, Russia and the Russians, their thinking and motivations. He takes on Dostoevsky, specifically his novel Crime and Punishment, and tries to make a rebuttal of the idea of the Russian soul, as presented in the former novel. Also, it is a jab at the so-called revolutionaries, their motivations and actions. Maybe Conrad tried to justify why he didn't follow in his father's and other family members' footsteps of revolutionary activities, preferring a type of self-exile. A bit of the plot. The plot is a narration by an unnamed English teacher living in Geneva, reading a journal written by a young Russian university student, Kirilo Sidorovich Razumov, with the narrator's own occasional input. The novel is divided into 4 parts. The part 1 begins with the assassination of a government minister, and Razumov's classmate, Holden, admits to him that he was involved in it, and further asks Razumov to help him escape. However, out of lack of interest in the political and revolutionary activities and fear for his own well-being, Razumov betrays Holden, who is promptly caught and executed. Part 2 moves to Geneva, Switzerland, where Holden's mother and sister wait for his arrival. The narrator is an English tutor to the sister. He learns that Holden was executed and informs the family. There also appears a group of revolutionary wannabes, and they try to recruit the distressed sister to their cause. Further, Razumov arrives, which pleases the sister since her brother described him in flattering terms in a few of his letters. One of the revolutionaries, a woman named Tekla, also becomes somewhat infatuated by Razumov. In part 3, Razumov spends a lot of time with the sister and becomes fond of her. On the other hand, his relationship with the narrator is somewhat rigid, since the narrator doesn't buy into the good first impression he made on the others. Part 4 moves back in time when Razumov was interrogated by the police in St. Petersburg and offered to prove his loyalty. And then the plot moves to Geneva, where Razumov is writing a report. Later he meets with Holden's mother and sister, and feeling guilty, he insinuates that he might have played a part in his death, and receives the punishment for it, seemingly not only human but also divine. And that's the basic plot. What are my thoughts about Under Western Eyes? I cannot say I enjoyed the book very much, not at the level I usually enjoy Conrad's writings. The novel has his trademarked scrutiny of the individuals and resulting society's dark side, with what might be considered occasional rare dark humor. The man who says that he has no illusions has at least that one. But even for Conrad, the book was a bit too analytical, and because of it, for me, difficult to read. Further, it seemed as he was trying to prove his personal opinions of Russia and the Russians, which were motivated by his traumatic childhood. I can sympathize with his personal feelings, but I am not sure if they should be used as a base for such a broad generalizations. As much as Dostoevsky was biased in favor of Russia, so was Conrad against it. Conrad maybe not hated, but highly disliked Dostoevsky because the latter disliked the Poles and took many literary jabs at them in his novels for violently opposing the Russian rule and their self-proclaimed status of protector of all Slavs. Conrad never referred to Dostoevsky by his name, but rather called him Dead Russian. The Polish-Russian rivalry goes back a long way, and it's still alive today, as can be seen in the current conflict in Ukraine. It seems as we, Poles, not all of us, will support anybody going against Russia. We like to play a bit of a victim. It is probably reasonable based on the events of the last couple of centuries, but the Russians' argument is that it was us, the Poles, who initially were the aggressor and oppressor, which is somewhat valid. The conflict is mostly political, and I prefer, as in any conflict, to maintain a more of a neutral stand and side with all the innocent victims of the political games on both sides. Under Western Eyes seems to have been influenced by Crime and Punishment, in spite of Conrad's hostile feelings toward Dostoevsky, and calling all of Russian's literature repugnant to me hereditarily and individually. Razumov, probably not coincidentally, sounds a lot like Razumkin, the friend of the protagonist of Crime and Punishment, and while Razumkin is presented by Dostoevsky as a loyal and trustworthy friend, a decent human being, and even a voice of reason, Razumov is described by Conrad through his actions as a false friend, somewhat of an antithetical character. He is presented as an all-encapsulating Russian soul, considering the whole of Russia his family, somewhat typical Russian in his atypical for the Western European beliefs and reasoning. In Russia, the land of spectral ideas and disembodied aspirations, many brave minds have turned away at last from the vain and endless conflict to the one great historical fact of the land. They turn to autocracy for the peace of their patriotic consciousness, as a weary unbeliever, touched by grace, turns to the faith of his fathers for the blessing of spiritual rest. Razumov's identity is dual, two-faced, in inner struggle between individual morality and social expectations, and to a large extent reflects the protagonist of Crime and Punishment, Raskolnikov, through his crime and later moral and psychological struggle. His punishment is internal and comes before confession. It drives him to confess and accepts physical retribution as a remedy to end the psychological torment, very similar to Dostoevsky's anti-hero. His need for redemption was caused by fondness for a woman, the sister. Razumov was a victim of a difficult childhood with no family, and his only aim in life was to find and feel some physical comfort, because he thought it would make him happy. He merely thought that life without happiness is impossible. What was happiness? And the search for happiness was the culprit behind his inner dilemma between morality, loyalty, and comfort. Beside the inner moral struggle, another distinct but related mood in the novel is the loneliness of each protagonist and the suffering it causes and the difficulty of living with it. To cut oneself entirely from one's kind is impossible. To live in a desert, one must be a saint. And further, the solitude caused by moral dilemma. Who knows what true loneliness is? Not the conventional word, but the naked terror. To the lonely themselves, it wears a mask. The most miserable outcast hugs some memory or some illusion. Now and then, a fatal conjunction of events may lift the veil for an instant only. No human being could bear a steady view of moral solitude without going mad. This mood is ever present in all Conrad's novels. Conrad was a very lonely individual, part of it the result of the moral doubts about the decisions he made in his youth, and he also thought loneliness was the prevailing condition in the society in general. He didn't like it, but accepted as the unchangeable reality of human existence. In the Under Western Eyes, Conrad is trying to explain Russia to the Western Europeans. He was born in the Russian Empire under its boot and knew it from his and his family experiences. He thought the West was somewhat naive in its perception and interpretation of what Russia is, underestimating the danger and overestimating the capability, and other times vice versa. This is still true today, and it not only applies to Russia but other countries in Eastern Europe. Conrad portrays Russians as somewhat childish, going along with and accepting what is being done to them, more interested in illusions than the real world around them. What must remain striking to a teacher of languages is the Russians' extraordinary love of words. They gather them up, they cherish them, but they don't hoard them in their breasts. On the contrary, they are always ready to pour them out by the hour or by the night with an enthusiasm, a sweeping abundance, with such an aptness of application, sometimes that, as in the case of very accomplished parrots, one can't defend oneself from the suspicion that they really understand what they say. The Tsars were seen by the majority of Russians as father figure, or in the case of Catherine the Great, mother, and they, the rulers, considered Russians as their children who had to be controlled and disciplined when necessary, because there were some misbehaving, rebellious rascals called criminals, terrorists, or revolutionaries ready to challenge the authority. In the book, Conrad makes rather obvious his not so favorable opinions about revolutions and more so the revolutionaries. The last thing I want to tell you is this. In a real revolution, not a simple dynastic change or a mere reform of institutions, in a real revolution the best characters do not come to the front. A violent revolution falls into the hands of narrow-minded fanatics and of tyrannical hypocrites at first. Afterwards comes the turn for all the pretentious intellectual failures of the time. Such are the chiefs and the leaders. You will notice that I have left out the mere rogues. The scrupulous and the just, the noble, humane, and devoted natures, the unselfish and the intelligent may begin a movement, but it passes away from them. They are not the leaders of a revolution, they are its victims. Conrad wrote Under Western Eyes after the failed revolution of 1905, of which a large part took place in the Kingdom of Poland, at that time part of the Russian Empire. Perhaps for him it was just another reminder of how futile the efforts of producing political and social changes are, and the result is nothing more than suffering of the innocent. He seemed to blame the dark side of each individual rather than the systems for all the anguish and misery, and in his eyes the revolutionaries were no Boy Scouts. Reading the novel after the successful 1917 Bolshevik Revolution and its bloody aftermath, many people agreed with his opinions. In the book, The Assassination of the Government Minister, defended by Holden, which killed many innocent victims to get one, further reiterates Conrad's beliefs. In life, you see, there is not much choice. You have either to rot or to burn, and there is not one of us, painted or unpainted, that would not rather burn than rot. So the drive is not altruistic, as often proclaimed by the revolutionaries, but rather motivated by egoism and based on self-gratification. But Conrad indirectly admits that there are idealistic revolutionaries, like his parents. In the novel, it is Tekla, who came from a well-off family, but she gave up her social position because she considered it unfair to so many other Russians who were poor and struggling. She became a revolutionary with the purpose of making life more just, but she is being taken advantage of by an opportunist revolutionary, Peter Ivanovich, who is there for his own self-serving motives. He represents the majority of any revolutionary movement's leadership. There's also Sofia Antonova, whose reasons are revenge for the way her family was treated by the people in power. And this is Conrad's profile of the revolutionaries, and it probably explains his skepticism. To sum it up, Under Western Eyes is not the best of Conrad's writings. Perhaps I am not being fair. The prose was beautiful, but the plot too complex. All of Conrad's novels are complex, but this one might be the most complex. I think for Conrad it touched too close to home and brought many painful personal memories. Maybe it was Conrad's way of dealing with childhood traumas and trying to understand and vilify people who were responsible for his parents' deaths. In all of his writings, at least fiction, he maintained distance from his roots. In all the novels I read, he never mentioned his home country, nor any Poles make part of any of the plots. But during the writing of Under Western Eyes, he would suffer delusions and converse with the novel's characters in Polish. And after the completion of it, he had a nervous breakdown. The process probably created many unpleasant thoughts and images linked to his past. Under Western Eyes can be considered criticism of Russia and the society, and Conrad does it in a highly educated and sophisticated but obvious manner. It is his explanation of Russia to the somewhat ignorant and passive, even in denial, Western European. Now the title, what does it mean? There's somewhat of a shock that such primeval behavior is allowed to go on next to the civilized Western Europe, and some civilized people, Poles, were under its boot. Maybe it was Conrad's plea for his country after the failed revolution of 1905 in the only way he knew how to do it. It seems the most painful and personal of Conrad's novels. Okay, let's talk about the physical book. The book I am holding is a paperback which I transformed into hardcover leather-bound edition. To make the cover I use grade A naturally tan hide I buy from a tanner in North Spain. It is the same leather Louis Vuitton uses to make his bags, So this top quality. I do all the processing of the leather myself. First I designed the cover, and for this I used an abstract painting of seemingly two individuals conspiring, and at the same time they are watched by others, and to me it reflects the plot of the novel, the abstraction and the implication of the painting. This is the back with the blurb, and inside front cover I printed a quote from the book. If you want to see a more detailed video where I explain how I transform paperback into leather-bound hardcover, click on the link in the description. I will make a maximum of 100 editions of each title. Each one will be numbered and initialed, and the numbers will go in chronological order from 2 up, since number 1 stays with me. The price will be around $100, so if you would like me to make one for you, you can click below on my email and send me a message. I do not guarantee I will do it, since it will depend on the time I have available, access to leather, and if I can get my hands on the copy of the book. Now, if you're not willing to spend the $100 but you still want the book, what you can do is click below on the PayPal link and donate $3 or more to my channel. And for every 100 donations, I will make a lottery and draw one name, and the winner will receive the book. So if you are cheap but feel lucky, this might be the way to do it. Also, your donations give me the extra motivation to make the book reviews, and I appreciate them very much, so thank you in advance. One more thing, when you make your donation, remember to include the title of the book you would like to win. The book itself is beautiful. Visually, it has a very nice texture, it smells great, and the more you handle it, the more beautiful it will become. And it makes a great gift for yourself or somebody who appreciates books. So if you want one, don't snooze or you might lose. Well, that's it, so let's end it here, and until next time, keep your ear close to the ground and read a book. Adios.